am now. And so, hey friends, this is me, Vishwas Nair. I'm the host of this podcast. There's a lot of things that going on in the app dev ecosystem. App dev ecosystem has been something that is phenomenally changing. And I'm my guest, Tulika Chaudhary, who is going to not just give you an insight about just click, 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 and you have your app services there. It's not that, it's beyond it. There's a lot of insight that goes behind when you're optimizing the services on the cost, when you're optimizing anything that comes with respect to any services that you think. So there's a lot that goes behind in the market, and we have to realize that, what, everything that you see on your web today is just requests coming out there, https, http, whatever it is. So there's a lot of configuration that has to go on. There's a lot that has to be rethought about. In a quick round of summary, there is obviously going to be a lot of things that you can really rely upon. So I'll say you how it is. So so now there is a stream that is running on my system. That means Tulika Chaudhary is in the backstage and she's doing a lot of things. But I am able to see it where you aren't able to see it, right? So in a simple way, every app dev ecosystem always needs to think security on the other side, compliance on the other side, building the right strategies on the other side. There is a lot that goes behind. So make sure that you have all your questions here, so that what we can do is we can just go out there and just figure out, okay, how Tulika can just give you that insight with respect to what app dev ecosystem requires, as well as how to approach anything on Azure with an app dev ecosystem mindset. And I think I can make Tulika Chaudhary come on the stage. And thank you so much, Tulika Chaudhary ma'am, for being on the show. Means a lot when you take off your time and just start working towards getting right approach and understanding that what app dev ecosystem needs today. So thank you so much, ma'am.
Uh, Thank you, Vishwas, and thank you for putting up with me. I mean, I've been struggling with a little bit today morning, as I told you, my laptop refused to work. It just crashed, which
Yeah,
means
yeah.
I've all of a sudden lost all my links. It's just
Yeah,
irritating.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I know that. I know that.
But anyways,
I
I'm here. I've got something going. Apologies in advance if something doesn't work. I'm really sorry about this.
I don't know problem. There's always a lot of things that we learn, right? You know, as a systems guy, I can surely assure you one thing, that chaos is something that helps me learn. So there is something going wrong in your system, that means you have a chance to learn something new. So yeah, that's how it is. So I think let's start with the first question. Azure App Services has been so well architected in terms of what app dev ecosystem requires today. That means it caters to the need of any developers. It's built for DevOps. I think it's basically DevOps enablement rather than just saying what an app dev ecosystem also requires. So even a developer who doesn't know anything can run a GitHub Actions and start running his application up and live. So let's talk about it. How is Azure App Services cater to the unique needs of architecting something on an idea of building something as a scalable and a reliable application? And how does app services cater to the ecosystem that is more hungry towards catering to the needs of architecting that requires deployment that is much more easier and that is much more developer friendly? So what's your take on this?
So I agree that our developer ecosystem has got more complex than it ever was before, and like it. So earlier, I remember I've been in the industry for a long time. So I started my journey with technology about 18 years ago, And at that time, building a website was just that. You chose a language, you went to some place and got a DNS, you went and deployed your code, and sometimes the deployment was as simple as copying over FTP, and you had your website running, and that was it.
I think that's
But
FileZilla.
now
That's FileZilla.
it is so much more complex because there is so many options which are available. I'm sorry,
I
what?
think I think we lost you. I think you can remove your virtual background if it's taking too much of compute. Yeah, yeah, I'm here. I'm here. I think there's a lag because of your virtual background. I think it would be fine if you can remove that.
Okay, I can. Can you just put me backstage and I'll go ahead and remove it?
Sure, sure. So I think, folks, there's a lot of chaos that goes behind. So it's not anything to be apologized upon. So it's basically technology that has to be defined in a right way. So what she was just talking about was basically when an app dev ecosystem wants to rely on and reliable infrastructure services that is already there, app infrastructure is already coming out in the market. That means like you just have to do your work of developing the business logic, and thereon you don't have to worry about how do you plumb it out and then get every architectural practices right. And there's a lot of things that goes behind in the market. So yes, I think let's start with this first introduction. So I think you had to continue your questions and answers. So yeah, you can go ahead with it.
Okay, so let me. Is it better now?
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely better. It's absolutely better.
Okay, so I just wanted to start with what is the Azure Application Platform. Now, Azure Application Platform, even though I specifically look at a specific area which is called web apps, but the entire Azure Application Platform, and this I'm only talking about the PaaS platform, it has several building blocks. So firstly, it has the web apps which I'm responsible for. This is, if you just want to go ahead and deploy a web application, this is the place that you use. But depending on the complexity of the application now, you might want to do some kind of event driven programming. If that's what you want to do, function app is another thing that we offer. Another option that we have, and this is specifically for customers who are using low code or no code, is logic apps. So if you have something like a workflow, you just want, you have an app which goes ahead, reads some values from a database, goes and then processes emails, sends off emails to customers, then generates a newsletter. That kind of an operation can be done, or orchestration can be done using logic apps. We've recently also launched container apps. So container apps is, I know our namings is quite confusing. So we have Kubernetes, so that's one thing. But container, I mean, for people who've used Kubernetes, it's really hard to manage. So container apps tries to take away some of that management difficulty and just allows your app to run on Kubernetes. So we use Kubernetes as a backend, but then we take away some of the hard management tasks that you need to perform. So you can use container apps. We also have static web apps, and static web apps is really good if you want, I don't know, a pure HTML site, a Node.js site. You don't want to worry about coding. You just want it to load up reliably fast, and just want it to run. You have static web apps. And all this runs on several hosting environments. So we've got the Azure PaaS that we've been, which I'm responsible for. But then we also have Spring apps in case your functionality is more Java specific. You can use Spring app options. But you can also go and Microsoft has alliance with OpenShift, which means that you can just go ahead and run your Kubernetes cluster on OpenShift and, just take advantage of everything that you have. We also are built on all the open source foundations. So we are built on Kubernetes. We have recently adopted Dapper as our open programming model. We, of course, as I mentioned, we use Spring Apps, Java, and all the other language stacks that you can think of. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we have a lot of deployment options as well. So you as the app developer can choose to deploy using Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, CLI, DevOps, GitHub, whatever takes your fancy and whatever is being used in your organization. So I think, you know, our platform has evolved to encompass all these various components just so that the users have flexibility to choose the language, the framework, the platform that is suited to the application needs that they have.
I think I think there's a lot that goes behind when you think about anything that is an apps dev ecosystem. There is a lot of chaos that has to be put in. As a product manager, you see industry as well as the business logic running.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very fair combination, right? You are talking about enablement. You're also talking about how easy it is to run business logic today. As a product manager,
Hmm.
let's ask this question in terms of, it's not you being the chat GPT, but it's also your 18 years of experience that has to be covered in this podcast as well. So let's talk about, as a product manager, when you see an app dev ecosystem that is coming up with lot of feedback loop. There is a lot of things that
Hmm.
goes behind. But app services is a PaaS service. That means nobody can complain, okay, this is not working because we have not configured it right, because it's a platform as a service.
Hmm.
You get everything configured, you get everything done. So let's talk about it. How do you as a product manager ensure that app services integrate seamlessly with Azure services commonly used to architect, like anything as good as AKS, anything as
Hmm.
good as service fabric, or anything as good as, even Logic Apps has an integration with app services today. So as a product manager, how do you cater to the needs of the ecosystem, and how do you think Azure connectivity ecosystem is going to impact the app dev ecosystem today in terms of architecting a solution as well as giving the right aspect of understanding of reliable and capable application building processes?
So um, it's a hard question. Like,
Yeah,
and the reason it's hard is that every application is different. We can of course find commonalities, but I get on calls with customers where, the common question is, okay, you've got, these 10,000 services. I don't know which one to use. What's suitable for our application? And we get into, and of course there is the long answer, right? So we have consulting teams whose job it is to go and look at the application to determine what is the right fit, what's the basic. But in the platform itself, what we try to do is build in certain integrations. And we have a new preview functionality that I thought that I'll maybe show today. Not this, sorry. So this functionality, so we've realized that actual users or customers who want to use our applications are very unlikely to use our applications in isolation. These days nobody just deploys a web app, right? So you would deploy a web app and you would want certain things, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what's the right mix. So we recently launched something called app spaces. So first of all, Vishwas, and I'm going a little ahead over here. Did you want me to go ahead and show you the just the app service experience, or just jump on to the new stuff? Tell me, what do you want me to do?
it's better you just jump onto the new stuff, because I've done
Everybody
more
knows
than
app
three to,
service.
yeah, yeah. App services, we have done it for a very long time.
Okay, sure. Okay. So let's go on to, we have something called app spaces. Have you seen this feature before?
No, I've never seen this now.
Okay. So if you go to the Azure portal and you can search for app spaces and you will see app spaces, it's still in preview. The reason I wanted to talk about it is that this is one of the ways in which it helps you get started. You know, what so I think the biggest problem in architecting any solution is to get started, figuring out what's the right place to get started. And I think that's the biggest problem. So app spaces is designed to help you get started. Now, what it does is there are two options over here. So first is you can start. We have, while talking to customers, we have collated a few sample templates, if you will. So we will say, okay, so what are the some of the common, solutions customers build? So maybe a React container app, Python API app with MongoDB, React web app with Node.js and MongoDB, or a C Sharp .NET app with SQL database. So we have all these options which are curated templates. But you can also do something like if you click on start deploying over here, and over here we can choose, this is, I'm already connected right now to my GitHub repo, so it shows me my GitHub repo. I'm going to go to my personal repo over here. And the thing I like about it is, so I can choose, I don't know, a sample app. Now over here, the name probably gives it away that it is a Python hello world. But anyways, and I'll say I want master. And see, it automatically goes and analyzes my GitHub repo and figures out that, okay, so this is a Python app. So you might want to deploy it using it's actually chosen the language version for me. So it says, okay, I'm detecting that you are doing a Python 3.1 app. Traditionally, your app, should be deployed as a traditional three-tier web app with API and websites. You can, it is also said that maybe you are doing this for, dev test, and in that case maybe you want our starter plan, so you can choose a free plan. You can actually go and look at the other plans which are available. If dev test is not what you're doing, you can do the basic or the hobbyist plan or the production grade plan, and it just asks you your app service name. So the only information it's asking you is basically, give me the name of the app that you want, give me your subscription, which is automatically selected, and tell me the region in which you want to deploy, and that's it. So it does an analysis in the background, figures out what the app kind is, and based on the app kind it will automatically go ahead and deploy the app for you. And I think that's pretty cool and pretty powerful, because now you could even have a little more complex. Now this is obviously a hello world, but you could have a more complex app and it will come and give you some suggestions, so we can, choose another app, another GitHub repo. So I was choosing a code app at the moment, but let's do something else a little more complex. And I was playing with something the other day. So in this case, I know this is a Docker app because I created some Docker containers. It's in C Sharp. And let's say I want main. And because I am deploying now a Docker file with the container stuff, it's telling me, oh, I found a Docker file in here. So maybe the right fit for you would actually be a container app. So it's, saying that container app. You can, of course, if this is not what you want, you can, change this, and you can choose to add a database for your app space as well. And again, the same limited amount of information, and it will get you started. Yesterday, I went ahead and deployed an app for myself. I actually used the Python sample template that we have, and you can see over here that this has gone and deployed the app. And so it's basically running GitHub Actions in the background. So it's created a YAML file, which is a workflow file for you. It's gone ahead and set up what it wants to deploy. In this case, it's got and initialized the containers. It's created the Azure resources. And notice that it has actually followed the best practices that we recommend. So which means that you should be storing all your application secrets in Key Vault, and it's set up Key Vault for you. And you should be monitoring your application using App Insights, and it's got an App Insights as well as the dashboard. It's set up monitoring and log analytics. It's even set up a Cosmos account for you, provided you with all the app settings. So it's got you set up in this exact one place. And this one place for us is a resource group. A resource group is actually a collection of resources, as the name implies. But then it's given you this template of a modern application that you can now build. You can now simply just go to, I like this view better. You can choose that, okay, it has gone and deployed my app. Now let's go ahead and change things. I've got these two web apps because it's already created a front end and a back end for you. It's gone and like created the Cosmos DB. I can go to the app service, and I can browse it, and hopefully I'm browsing the right app service, and it's created a to-do list. I mean, obviously it is a very simplistic application because we are just following a template, but just imagine how powerful this is, given that it's, you know, put the entire infrastructure for you. Now all you need to do is, put in your code. We've already done the thinking and put in whatever architectural components that you would need for your applications. And I think that's very useful. Did I lose you, Vishwas?
No, ma'am, I'm still here. Yes. All right. I think app space preview has always been something that is more phenomenal, right? There is a lot of trend that has gone behind building this product. That means the evolution from a VM to
You're
what we
right.
are seeing today as in past. I think there is a lot of evolution that we have seen till today. So let's talk about it. What are the key features and the capabilities of Azure App Services that architects should consider in order to get that high available, highly fault tolerant application? Because there are a lot of things which are very DevOps friendly. That means
Hmm.
there are deployment slots out there. There are a lot of other environment capabilities that we can add. There is a lot of
Hmm.
things that we can not even consider architecting, but yet there is already an option that is already available so that we can go and architect this solution out there. So what are the key pointers that any architect who is using this product needs to consider? And also, when he thinks about fault tolerance, what are the main key aspects that he needs to look back at and think about? Okay, man, you know what, we are not hackable, we are secure, we are reliable for our customers. So what is that?
Okay. So, so first, just going over, what are the certain features which I believe are useful for when you're designing your solutions. Firstly, App Services has support for multiple languages and frameworks. You can also bring your own container, so you don't have to rely on what we provide. You can add your own container, and I'll show a small demo how you can do that. We have continuous CI/CD built in. It's a fully managed service, and I think that's important because the infrastructure is responsible for maintenance, security patching, scaling, etc. And we have support for virtual networks, isolated environments, also for web application firewall. And of course, Azure in itself is global and geo distributed, which means app services, which is built on top of it, will take advantage of it. So the reason I so you mentioned about reliability, and I'll try to take some of these points and maybe show a little bit of a demo and do some kind of a talking. So firstly, this is a simple table that we typically give for customers. If you are building app services for reliability, what are some of the things that you need to consider? The first is that you should always deploy your app service in a zone redundant manner. So now question and answer for you, Vishwas. Do you know what is zone redundancy?
I think it's basically kind of a shield in order to get the zones. Zones has to be. I don't know about it, so sorry for that. I
Okay.
have a limited knowledge about app services.
Okay. So, zone redundancy, not just for app services, but any service as such, is basically when you deploy your app, your app is actually deployed in a data center. So it's deployed on a VM in a data center, and that particular VM then is your zone, if you will, because it's not just the VM, right? It is the network, it is, the base machine on which it is, that entire thing constitutes a zone. Zone redundancy means that you deploy your app in multiple zones within the same environment. So let's say that you want to create your app in South India. Now, well, South India has a number of data centers. So there's a data center in Chennai, we have a data center in Delhi. So all these data centers, what zone redundancy really means is you can architect your app such that it is deployed in multiple data centers, which allows for fault tolerance, which means that if for some reason a data center goes down, in that case, you can at least fall back to another zone. Um, you can also and one of the things that you need to do for zone redundancy is you have to have an app service plan that supports availability zone. So we only support availability zones for our premium SKUs. So if you have an app deployed in one of the premium zones, you can take advantage of zone redundancy. The problem, like I see a lot of customers who come to us and like, I have had this failure and tell me what to do now. The problem is that you've had the failure and you've already had the failure. So, you have to plan in advance. You can't do something if things have already failed. You should always create separate app service plan for production and test. And I cannot emphasize this enough. So app service plan is in our terms is a collection of various apps which reside in a single app service plan. So you can have more than one app which reside in an app service plan. Essentially what it means is that all these apps are running on a VM, or you could scale out and you could have multiple VMs, but it is basically running on a set of VMs, and all the apps are running on all these VMs. What we do get a whole lot is a customer will, often be doing testing and then make the app service plan have production apps. And we sometimes get customers who've got like 100 apps in a single app service plan. We allow you to do that. I mean, there is nothing on the portal which is going to stop you from doing that. But the problem is if you deploy 100 apps and then there is only one of these apps which is very critical, all these other apps are just sitting around and consuming resources. If they are consuming resources, it is taking away from the app which is critical for you. So that's the other thing. You should always have app service plans which are different for production and test. I'll show a small demo on scalability. So, scaling is a feature that we provide. We do have several kinds of scaling, and I'll show you a little bit of a demo on auto scale as well as automatic scaling. Again, a frequent thing that we find is, you know, it is often a knee-jerk reaction in the way people do scaling. So they like, if the app has been getting high CPU for a minute, go scale it to 10 instances. Okay, absolutely. This is, cloud, and we talk about how scaling is a good thing. However, keep in mind that you should have some kind of baselines for scaling. You can't just scale up and down, because what happens is, as when you scale up, your app gets deployed to another instance. If it gets deployed to another instance, that means the app has to restart. If the app is restarting, in that case there is a little bit of downtime because your app is restarting at that point. Similarly, when you're scaling down, you're basically reducing the number of VMs and your app is restarting again and your request is getting routed to the VM which is running. So you should avoid frequent scaling up and down. Another thing that we recommend is always use deployment slots. This is a feature that we provide for app services. That is basically, we allow you to create another app, if you will. We call it deployment slots, but essentially it's another app on which you can do your deployments. The advantage of creating another app on which you do your deployment is your production app doesn't get affected at all. You can do all your testing on your deployment slot, and when you're ready, you can just hit a button over there on the portal and just swap it, which means now your deployment slot or the test slot becomes your production, and your production will become your deployment slot. So which allows you to do your testing, but at the same time make sure that your application is available. And finally, we have a feature called health check. Health check allows you to identify if there are non-responsive workers and do something for it. So sometimes, in spite of, and I think I was talking yesterday to a cloud solution architect, and he was like, oh, my customer had this downtime and they want to figure out the root cause and fix their applications. My take on this is everybody tries to write good code. I mean, nobody intentionally writes bad code, right? But there's still bad things which happen in the code, and we have to account for it. I don't think that anybody can go and write perfect code. So therefore, you need to take care of certain things which are available in the platform to allow you to recover from some scenarios. So in spite of everything, in spite of writing the best codes, in spite of having the scaling options, you might still get into the fact that your app is taking high CPU and it is not responding. In that case, you can take advantage of a feature like health check and say determine that these instances are not responding, and take an action on it. So I'm going to show a couple of things over here, and again, it's possible that most of you know it, but for the few that don't, so I've got a demo app over here, and it's a fairly simple .NET app. I typically show this app when just just to show a demo kind of a thing. Actually, I'm in the wrong resource. So this is my demo app. It's a .NET app. I actually show it to use this app to show some of the diagnostic capabilities that we have. I don't think we'll have time for the diagnostic capabilities, but anyways, you know, like I try to debug some of these. But it doesn't matter. What I'm going to do is try and see that if I can configure some kind of scaling options. So the first thing that I want to mention over here is that app. This is the app. And if you look at the properties, there's something called the app service plan. Remember what I was talking to you earlier? That the app service plan is a collection of apps. So it's saying over here is your app service plan. This is the name of the plan. It also tells you that it is running on a premium P1 instance. And we can go ahead and change this. Let's go ahead and just look at our scaling options for app service plan. So you see over here, this is the app service plan. The first and the most obvious one is you could do a scale up, right? So you can choose to run on a different VM. This is what it's telling you. I'm running on a premium P1 V3. It gives you the cost, and it tells you, how much vCPU is available, memory, storage, etc., etc. And you can determine that your app, in general, you would want to run it on a better SKU, and we would recommend. So you should always do some testing and figure out what's the best queue for you, and you should run it on a better SKU if possible. So, and also notice that some of the pricing over here, people will say, oh, premium V3, that's very expensive, maybe I don't want to run it. But then look, if you look at the pricing, the V3 and the V2 is quite comparable as far as pricing is concerned. And you will like over here, this is P1 V2, which is getting like 3.5 GB of RAM, and this is 8, which is definitely an improvement. So you can determine what scale you want. But we also have an option called scale out. And I think for app services or for any cloud application, I would say that scaling is an important thing that you should spend some significant amount of time. So we have several scalings. One is manual, and I'll not go there because I think everybody understands it. If you want to scale out, you can set a maximum instance count, and that'll be a constant and always maintained. There's automatic scaling and there's rule-based scaling. I'll come to rule-based scaling in just a little bit. I'll show you automatic scaling. So I've configured this to be automatic scaling, which means that, so in rule-based scaling, you have to determine what your rule is. So you can determine things like, oh, if my app starts taking 100% CPU, scale me out. If my app starts taking, you know, so many requests, scale me out. So you have to determine what your parameter is and what are the values for the parameters to determine rules. Sometimes it's hard to figure out. So therefore, we have come up with this new preview option called automatic scaling. This allows the platform to determine how to scale up and scale down based on traffic. So what the platform is doing is it's going and monitoring the amount of traffic which is coming to your website, and it's got some thresholds like a number of requests, CPU, memory, and based on these thresholds, it will adjust the instance count of your application for me. You can specify the maximum instance count. So in this case, I've said, okay, scale me out to a maximum of 3. I don't want to go more than 3. I don't want to pay for it. But, if something happens, scale me out to 3. So, so you can set this up, and notice that I have said no other rules over here. That's all I've said. Let's go back to our the web app, which is this web app. And I'm going to now open another browser window. And I'm going to just, simulate some load on this particular app. Instead of, I could have done a curl command and done it, like from the command line, but I'm just going to go a little fancy and use Azure load testing. Again, if you haven't used Azure load testing, it's really easy to set up, and you can run a number of tests. So, try it out if you haven't. So I've already created it for this particular app. So I'm going to go to my test. As you can see, I'd run it earlier. Basically, all it's doing is that it is pinging the base URL of your website, and it simulates a number of user connections and generates some kind of load on your app. So, and you can define parameters like how much time do you. So I've specified that run the load for 2 minutes, which, as you can imagine, is very short, but for demo purposes, that's 2 minutes. And I've said for 2 minutes, simulate 200 virtual users, and go ahead and let's simulate the load. So let's go ahead and run this, and you can give a JMeter, it's fine. So we have started the run. From here, I also had set up application insights. And Application Insights is another Azure service that allows you, we provide a codeless attach for Application Insights. So you can just go to, I'm already at the application. So you can, we have a codeless attach, which means you don't need to modify your code to enable App Insights. You can just enable it. As you can see, there's just a button which says enable, disable, and we'll automatically start collecting Application Insights for you. I'm going to go to my home. And let's go to look at something called live metrics. Application Insights has a lot of capabilities. I'm just looking at one of them. So as you can see that this is provisioning, so which means it started generating the load. And remember, I was running on a single app, single instance. So as you can see, we are ramping up. Uh, the number of requests has gone up. You can see that the CPU is ramping up as well as the request rate, the duration. My failures is fairly constant, which means, the app is fine. But notice that it has automatically now scaled to 2 instances. So it's determined that, okay, you're getting so many requests on this instance, and my CPU is a whole lot. So it's taking 182% CPU. So that's a whole lot. And therefore, it would be better. The platform itself has decided that it would be easier or better for the application if it just scales out. And I think that that's a great thing, because then otherwise you don't have to worry about how do what is the rule. But in case you do want to set up rules, we have that option as well. So let me go ahead and, the test is still running, and that's fine. We'll keep it running. So I'll go to another app. Let's take this one. And let's go to the app service plan again. And we'll go to the scale out option. I just want to show the rule-based scaling just so that you get an idea of what you can set up. So this is currently running on one instance. It's got manual scale, but I can change this to be rule-based. And you could see over here, manual scale is you can change the number of instances, but you can do this automatic. And then it says, okay, we can do this automatically for you, but tell me, how do you want to scale? Do you want to scale just to a specific instance count, or do you want to scale based on a metric? And we can determine that, I want to scale on a metric. And let's say I want to go to a maximum of 3, and the default could remain 1. But let's add the metric too. So we can go to add scale condition. And this is telling you, let's do the same thing. So you can do the scale using like on a specific date and time. So you can determine that I want to scale only on these days. This is valid if you got like a sale coming up, anything where you think that a lot of traffic is going to be generated, so you can add this. You can also say do it only on specific days. Maybe you get a lot of scale on weekends and you want to add a rule which does it only for weekend. You can click on add a rule over here, and you can basically choose your metric on which if you want to scale. So one is that you do a fixed scale, which you say, okay, every Saturday and Sunday, increase my scale to 3 instances. But you can also say is, I don't know which day going to get more usage. So I have identified certain metrics, and that could be CPU, it could be memory, it could be number of requests. And based on these things, go ahead and scale me out. So it tells you CPU's percentage. It's telling you average is 11 in this case. Again, it's a demo app, so there's nothing. But I can say that, okay, scale me out if my metric is more than 70%, and if 70% is there for 10 minutes. Remember what I was telling you, scaling in and out very frequently is not a good thing either, because that's just going to add that additional downtime of adding another instance. Agreed that it is a small downtime. It's about 30 seconds to 1 minute max, but it's still a downtime. I mean, in today's day and world, nobody can allow their app to be down. So you can say that, scale up, and you can say increase count by 5. You can give a cooldown period, which means that I'm going to monitor for another 5 minutes and see if I'm going to scale up. further, and you can add this rule. You can also add, typically we would recommend that when you do a scale out rule, you also have a scale in rule, because otherwise what has happened is that we saw that the CPU went to 100% or more than 70% as part of our options that we set up, but after some time we noticed the CPU went down, but we don't have a rule which tells us to scale down. So you should always add a rule which is basically saying scale down, or scale in, which is saying, okay, if the CPU is now less than 10%, whatever, reduce the instance count. But compare this to the auto scale option that I showed you earlier. The auto scale option lets the platform decide and do it. So it really depends on what kind of baselining you've done for your application. If you've done a lot of load testing on your application, if you figured out what are the right metrics for your application, absolutely go set up the auto scale, because it gives you fine grained control over what how you manage the scale. And scale is important because it affects the cost of your application. But if that's something that you've not invested in and you would want to rely on platform capabilities, in that case you have the automatic scaling, which is basically just go ahead and set an instance count and it'll automatically do it for you. I do realize when I'm talking about it, naming is a little unfortunate, auto scale and automatic scaling, but you know, I don't control naming. Have you fallen asleep, Vishwas? I
No,
know I've been
ma'am.
talking a lot.
No, no, I'm still here. So yes, so I think it's a fair choice if an architect chooses to. Okay, we have to spend a little bit more, but yet we are going to get the resilience and the capabilities of what we could have had thought about scaling 10 times bigger. I think I think that is what web apps are. Web apps are basically that one go-to service. Like if you want to start your startup right now, web apps is the one. So just go ahead and start that out. All right, Amit Tripathi, thank you for giving me that smile. I was not sleeping, by the way. I was still I was still listening to it. I know that it's a Sunday morning, and I think there's a lot of
Oh,
things that goes.
Saturday. See, you even missed the day. It's Saturday.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's Saturday. It's Saturday at the end of the day. So yeah. Every holiday feels Sunday to me, man. I don't know about it. But yeah, to anybody who wants to understand what Azure ecosystem is basically enabling cloud engineering with more available and debuggable approach rather than making it more complex to you. I think what Azure
Yeah.
App Service capability shows is basically that developer enablement that we want to have in the future. That means, I have a set of developers who are like classy example of some geeks who know how to code the best code in the world, but doesn't know how to put out an infrastructure. There you have it, my friends. Azure App Infrastructure is the one. I think Ma'am is trying to show something else. So let me just share the screen, and there you have it.
So I basically wanted to spend a because you had a number of questions about architects and how do we architect our solution. So I had a few slides, which is basically our recommendation on how you should set up your, again, and I do want to caution, this is our architectural recommendations. You would actually have to determine what your application needs, so don't follow it just blindly. But basically this is a basic what a basic web app looks like. I've spoken about app service plan. The app service plan contains an app service web app, and each web app, our recommendation is should have slots. We can allow you to create up to 5 slots, so you can have like a production slot, a staging slot, a testing slot, a last good slot, and so you can have, if you will, various versions of your application on these slots, and you can determine which version of the application you want to run. So determine, based on the version that you choose, that's the version you can put your production traffic in. We even have a feature called tip or test in production, which is basically you can set up rules on your application which says that direct 5% of my traffic to, I don't know, my staging slot, and put everything else to production, because if you want to do some testing. So 5% of traffic to my staging slot, send everything else to my production slot. So those are also options that you can do. You obviously, any kind of app that we can think of will probably have some kind of a database integration. So that's your SQL server. You could also have a logical server where you store your data, which could be a Cosmos DB or something else. We have a lot of monitoring options. So I spoke about App Insights a little bit ago, where I showed you the live metrics, but you also have Azure Monitor, which allows you to look at all the metrics that we store. So you can look at CPU, memory, requests, store the metrics in different places, send it off to your storage account. So those are good capabilities, especially if you want to do a lot of analysis of your website to figure what is happening. We also recommend using the Azure Key Vault. So if you have any kind of configuration data, any kind of secrets, database connection strings, any username, passwords, instead of storing it in config files within your app service or within your code, we recommend that we should use Azure Key Vault to do it. And of course, you should do the Azure Active Directory integration and have a proper DNS server. So this is a basic application. But now let's start looking at, as you start building something which is called like a zone redundant web application. And as you can see from here, now the architecture becomes a lot more complex, right? So you have to first, what is zone redundancy? A zone is one data center, if you will, which contains the application, your VM. So I mean, even though we are PaaS and you don't need to worry about VMs, but underlying everything, we are running VMs, right? That's the basic thing. So zone redundancy is you have several instances of this application running in redundant zones. What it ensures is that if one zone goes down, the other zone can take care of your application and it will be highly available. To configure zone redundancy, we right now do not have a portal experience for it. You would have to do it through ARM templates. And you would also have to do certain other things. So firstly, you would have to set up something called the application gateway. The application gateway is a layer 7 HTTPS load balancer. So which is responsible for load balancing. But the good thing is it comes with the Azure web application firewall. And you mentioned, Vishwas, a little while ago about security, and that's one of the things that you can do to prevent any kind of DDoS attacks, restrict the IP addresses which can access your application, and so on. So a web application firewall is extremely important, and you can put all these inside a virtual network. So which means this is your network. It could be just a virtual network, or if you have on-premise resources that you want to connect to Azure, you can use something called ExpressRoute. So ExpressRoute allows you to connect your on-premise resources onto Azure. So you can do all this. You can set up subnets, and you can create private endpoints. A private endpoint simply means that an endpoint is created for, in this case, a private endpoint for app service means only internally within your architecture can anybody access your app service. Anybody outside or anybody coming from the public endpoint cannot access app service because it now has a private endpoint. And in the ideal case, everything, all the Azure services inside your architecture should actually be running as private endpoints. So your database, nobody should be able to access the database from the outside. Your Key Vault should be just internal only. Your storage should be internal only. So you can set up private DNS zones. So when the user requests a traffic, first the application gateway and the firewall will check its rule to determine if these requests are allowed. Based on it, if the request is allowed, it will go ahead and check your private DNS zones, figure out the private endpoints, send it to an app service or wherever it needs to go. And so that is how you build a zone redundant web application. And the advantage is, so all I'll just want to mention over here that all these zones are in a single region. So if you've done East US, these zones are all in East US, which means that if a zone goes down, if a data center goes down due to any reason, in that case, all traffic automatically will be routed by the application gateway to the other zone. So, so if zone 1 goes down, it'll be routed to zone 2 and zone 3 and so on. So that's one kind of architecture that we, if zone redundancy, and I think most applications, at least production applications, can benefit from using zone redundancy. um, the only caveat out here is zone redundancy is only available if you're using one of our premium SKUs, or you're using app service environments or our isolated environments, because as you can see that it comes with all these other services integration, which is basically the application gateway and the WAF or the Azure firewall. We also have a multi-region application. And so zone redundancy, as I was mentioning, was all these zones are in a single region. Now if you want redundancy such that you have two zones, like an active passive, you can configure your application to be, have one active region and the second as a standby region. At any point of time, all requests will always be going to the active region. And the reason you might want to think about having something like this is that I mentioned that we update our platform regularly. So every month we are updating our services. Once the updates are running, we have paired zones. So which means that, for example, I will never run an update on East US and West US simultaneously. So in that case, your West US could be your standby zone or standby region. And if for some reason you start getting failures in the region we are doing an update, you can always direct traffic to your standby region, which is in West US, and you can be assured that we are not going to update both the regions at the same time. To do all this, we have a service called the Azure Front Door. The Azure Front Door is a load balancer which goes ahead and routes your request to whichever your active or your standby region is. And you can also, again, with Azure Front Door, you can take advantage of WAF, the framework, the firewall, because we do, DDoS has become so common these days that, and we have protection, by the way, on Azure load balancers, which will, try to take down places which are trying to DDoS us. But however, from an application standpoint, you have to take certain actions on your application as well, just to make sure that your application is secure. So that's how you can do, and these are some of our architecture. You can go to the Azure Architecture Center. The Azure Architecture Center has a number of case studies, if you will, and you can figure out, which is the right kind of architecture which is applicable for you. And I wanted to, talk a little bit about the security features. So we have the identity and access management. App Services supports different authentication and authorization mechanisms. We have Azure AD, OAuth, OpenID Connect. You can also determine data protection, which is, we turn this on by default, by the way. So data protection is on by default. So we turn on HTTPS by default. We give you TLS 1.2 by default, which means that you can choose to downgrade it, but I mean, why would you? And you can also be a little more secure, and you can look at doing client certificate authentication. And we also have features like network isolation, IP restrictions, which you can set on your VNet in case you're interested. An app service is compliant with all the industry standards like the ISO SOC standards and the HIPAA or the high-tech standards. I'm just going to really show in case people are not aware of where some of these features are. So if you go to the configuration blade, I've just realized we're almost at an hour, so I'm rushing. Sorry about that.
No problem, no problem. You can take your time. You can take your time. I think
So,
this is a very good demo that is showcasing all aspects of app dev. So I think this is the best one. Yeah, you can go ahead
so
with it.
we have So we have just 5 more minutes, I think, or well, less than that. So we have the HTTPS, we turn it on by default, which means that all your traffic is routed on HTTPS. You can see over here that we have done the TLS configuration and we have configured it on the highest version of TLS, which is 1.2. Again, these are done by default. If you want, you can change it, but this is what we'll do by default. You can also set up which is the minimum TLS cipher suite. So as you can see, the minimum cipher suite that we are using is 128-bit inscription, SHA encryption, but you can choose and change this. But as far as we are concerned, this is the most secure, which allows traffic to go in. You also can choose to add your client certificate. So you can see over here in case you want another level of security. Keep in mind that when we are talking about HTTPS, the way we are architected is that we do SSL termination on our front end. So within app services, we have two major components. One is a front end where all your requests are routed. And the front end now goes and routes the request to the worker, which is actually hosting your app. SSL termination happens at the front end. So, which means the request between the front end and the worker is on HTTP. In general, that's not a problem because now keep in mind that this is within the data center. So, within the data center, it is traffic within the data center and that's not encrypted. But if you want to go ahead and put in some extra security even after that, maybe you can choose to do client certificates where even though the request is within the data center, it now has client authentication enabled, which means that firstly, we will send the client authentication token with the request to the worker. So that's one level of security that you can add. I also mentioned authentication, and just real quick, you can add an identity provider and you can just select all the major identity providers are available. So Microsoft, of course, which is our Azure Active Directory, but you can choose another identity provider. And the reason I mentioned this is that you don't have to write code for it. So this is almost like a codeless setting up an identity. So you can choose whatever identity you want, and we will take care to manage this entire thing for you rather than you actually downloading the SDK, writing the code for it, doing the auth and all the good stuff. So so that is for another thing. And I promised the last thing because I've been talking last thing and going again.
No problem. You can still go ahead and do 100 demos.
So I've been talking about that you can do all the DDoS protections and everything else, and this is where you can do it. So what we have is a virtual network, and you can bind your app to a virtual network. Once you bind your app to a virtual network, these are the capabilities that we provide. So you can, set up a DDoS plan. When you set up, as soon as you set up a DDoS plan, all the DDoS metrics will be available to you. So you can see how many requests are coming, which we are classifying as a DDoS request. What are we doing to the requests? Are we failing them, and so on? This is your Azure firewall or web application firewall. As it says, it's a L3, L7 firewall. It is a software firewall, which means that it is running on one of our edge devices. And that's one way that you can set up some restrictions over here. And you can also create private endpoints, and private endpoints is useful. As I mentioned in my diagram earlier, the private endpoints allows you to connect using, make sure that your application does not or cannot be connected from the outside. And depending on what kind of an application it is, this is something that you may want to do. If it's an internal application, maybe you want to set up an IP restriction that only certain IP addresses can connect to this application and everything else is barred. So because this is a virtual network, you can do things like set up an address space. So you can say this virtual network belongs to this address space. You can set up, this is where I was talking about private endpoints, so you can add private endpoints. You can also add service endpoints. So Vishwas, you had a question earlier about how do we connect to another service, and this is one way that you can do it. You can add service endpoints and say this network allows us to connect to these other services that we have in the list. So you can define that these are basically, these are nothing but resource providers for us. So you can say that for this network, only allow connections to, I don't know, Active Directory and Event Hub and Container Registry, and block everything else. And those are things that, you can enable for your website just to make sure that it is more secure. So I think that's all I had, Vishwas.
Sure. I think there is a lot that we have to learn.
Yeah,
There is a
I know.
lot that is. I think I think giving demos is very hectic in terms of whatever can go wrong, right? Things can go wrong all of the sudden, and we will be like, oh man, what it is. I think the experience spoke here, right? 18 years of experience in Microsoft, and talking about, okay, this is where my laptop didn't give me hand today, but I'm not going to allow it take my demos out. I think that's a fair game. That's a fair game. 18 years of experience, man. It really gives me a lot of pleasure in hosting you on my podcast, not just because anything related to Azure, because I'm a huge fan of Azure from a very long time, as you know me. But but critical applications, when it requires you to be an engineer, I think you have to just go back, be a student, and just get back and start working on it. I think that's the whole point. Kiran, I think, yes, there is a question. When we create an app space, it creates everything
Mhm.
for us, like keyword, monitoring application. And does all these resources incur separate cost, or else is it part of the Azure space cost?
So it would be a separate cost. But what we do is that when we do the integration, we've gone and checked if some of these services have free tiers. So everything that each of these services that we configured for you will either use the free tier by default or the hobbyist tier, which is the lowest tier available.
Hmm.
But it will appear, like if you look at the bill, it will appear as a separate cost and will not be part of your Azure app service, because these are essentially different services that we are adding to the.
So basically, if you consider, even if you are putting out a functions as their own pricing model.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
functions might be some sense, but at the end of the day, when you are using Cosmos DB to one extent, Cosmos DB bill will be separate, and there is a lot of other IoT applications cost a lot, man. IoT applications cost a lot. When you are in IoT application, there is a lot of data ingestion going on, so data services will cost you a lot. I think
correct.
it's a fair game. You have to use the hobbyist tire, use the deployment slots, just make sure everything is working in a very compact budget, then go ahead
Mm.
with whatever it is. So I think generally what I've seen as a trend is people move from AWS to Azure because the pricing tire is much more novel in terms of what they can offer, and it's also more pass oriented services. So I think there is a lot that you can learn.
So
And
yeah, so we try to cater to a lot of, you know
for
a
now
lot of
practices.
audiences. The problem, there's the plus side, which means that if you're looking for something, you'll probably find it.
Yeah.
The downside is that it tends to become a little more complex.
Yeah, when you are
Because
migrating and a lot of other stuff.
correct, because it so first of all, if you're used to any other service, any other platform, and you do the migration, just the fact that you have to learn a different UI makes everything so much harder. you know like in AWS, you're used to doing a deployment in a certain way, and we have the same options, and it's just hard, because there's a mental block which tells us, oh, this is how I'm used to doing, and now I have to learn a different way. So that we get that.
Yeah, of course.
um We do have things like ARM templates, and you can explore it if you want to do some kind of automation. If you don't want to do this again and again, we can understand that people who create a lot of services at scale might not want to, you know, deploy everything from the portal, which will obviously be slower. Click, click, click at different places. So we have ARM templates. And I know
Terraform.
that Kiran asked me a question. Do you have a template for a React web app with Java? No, we don't. But if you think that that is something which would be useful, I can pass on that feedback and we'll be happy to. We are in the process. As you saw, it was a preview thing. So we are adding more templates. So we love this kind of feedback. We can definitely add this up.
Sure. I think you came on my podcast and there's one feedback loop that is already there for you. That's great. That's great, folks. Thank you so much for being a part of it, ma'am. When you face so much of chaos with the laptop not working, but still
Yeah,
you
I
came
know. I'm
back,
really sorry about that.
and you came back. Yeah, I think it was an amazing section. Thank you so much, Kiran. And I apologize because I thought it was basically a Spring Boot template that you were asking, and basically what you were asking was, okay, is there any boiler
Yeah.
codes which are available? And I told yes, we have it, but you got your answer. There is no Java React web
Yeah,
app
we don't
template
have
with
we
Java
have
in
the
our space.
correct.
So yeah, I think there is a lot that I have to learn. There's a lot that you also can get insights from her. So connect with her and just happy
Yeah.
that we completed a podcast today with a lot of chaos.
And again, apologies to everybody who had to, face the issues of my laptop. Like facing
Sure.
my laptop issues for myself is fine. Making everybody else face it.
Yeah, I can understand it. I think she was talking about Azure architecture practices. I think there is this module. Please go ahead and check it out.
Yeah.
All these modules are, trust me, they are built for some amazing practices out there. So if you don't understand it, learn the module and go back and implement in your production. So that's how they're built for. And yeah, of course, thank you so much, my friends. This is Vishwas Nayan signing off from the show. Meet you soon with a new guest. I think it's tomorrow itself. So let's meet you tomorrow and we will have a lot of things to learn. Thank you so much, Tulika ma'am. Thank you so much to my dear audience for being on the show. It means a lot. And bye bye. Perfect.